Welcome to Prince George's Community College and our panel discussion, U.S. Immigration Policy and the Dreamers of Maryland. I'd like to thank the Prince George's Community College television station and the students of the television production class of Professor Sherelle Williams for engaging in this project with us. My name is Marlene Cohen, and I'm a professor of communication and theater, as well as the coordinator of the International Education Center here at Prince George's Community College. November 6th is a day when people across the United States and we in Maryland will be voting to select our next president. But there will be many other issues to vote upon, candidates to vote upon, and referendum votes that are very important. Question number 4 on the Maryland ballot this year is called a referendum petition, Public Institutions of Higher Education Tuition Rates. It would allow some undocumented immigrants to pay in-state or in-county tuition at Maryland colleges, beginning with community college. To qualify, students are required to have attended a Maryland high school for 3 years or more, as well as prove that their parents or themselves have filed taxes. And there are other provisions of the law. Today, our panel is going to examine the current situation for undocumented students and what the Maryland law would change. Let me introduce you to our guests. First, Mr. Lance Conklin from World Relief in Baltimore. Pastor Paul Johnson of Prince George's County and Action in Montgomery. Mr. Jack Martin of FAIR, which stands for the Federation for American Immigration Reform in Washington, D.C., and our Prince George's Community student, Urami, who asked that her last name not be used. Each speaker will have an initial speech and then a 3-minute response speech to remark on any of the issues that were raised. Following the presentation, we'll take a short break and then hold a question and answer session. I ask that the audience not participate in this presentation and listen quietly. First, we're going to begin with J. Lance Conklin. Mr. Conklin's the director and an attorney at Immigration Legal Services at World Relief. It's an immigration legal clinic in Baltimore. He oversees a team which supports 15 World Relief offices providing immigrant legal services, as well as overseeing a program to enable churches to legally provide immigrant services. And we've asked Mr. Conklin to give us the context for this discussion and talk to us about current U.S. immigration policy. Mr. Conklin.
When people talk about undocumented immigrants in the United States, they often talk about a line. People always say, well, why can't they get in line? Why can't they wait their turn? Or why can't they legalize their status? Or why can't they become citizens? And I understand those questions, but unfortunately that immigration law is much more complex. In fact, sometimes it can be very difficult to deal with and can be sometimes very unforgiving for those that make the smallest mistake. In fact, within our system and in its quota system, sometimes it can be impossible for people to actually immigrate to the United States, and as well, or it can create a really long line for them. So for the undocumented immigrants, what it is that for them, it's either the line is really long or there is no line at all. But to put that in context, the way immigration law works in the United States, it's kind of, on the one hand, you have the temporary visas, the non-immigrant visas, the students, the workers, the visitors. On the other hand, you have the more permanent system, which is usually the green card system. And what it means is that there's a couple of ways people generally immigrate to the United States for a green card. It's usually through family or employment. The U.S. law says that a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident can petition for immediate family members. For the permanent resident, the green card holder, it's usually a spouse or child. For a U.S. citizen, they can petition for spouse, parent, child, or even brother and sister. On the other side is employment. Usually this involves a job, sometimes not. For the best of the best, cream of the crop, what they call extraordinary alien, they can just prove that they are extraordinary and come and get a green card. There's the religious workers, there's those who have, $500,000, $1 million to come, start a business, create jobs. But the majority of people, what they're doing is they have an employer that's going to take the time, spend the money, petition for them, and what they have to do is usually prove that the position that the position that the individual is in is a shortage occupation. And it's a very complicated process. The couple other ways that individuals immigrate to or come to the United States is like asylum or refugee, or the lottery system, where there's about 50,000 visas set aside for those that win the visa lottery. Now, in the context of this for the undocumented immigrant, where they kind of come into play, you say, well, they have all these ways they can do it, why don't they pick one of those ways? Well, if you have to think about it, somebody that's come here, particularly even a young person that came with their parents, if they had family members that could petition for them, then what would happen, they probably would have done that a long time ago. They probably don't have the close relative that is here legally to petition for them. In regards to employment, usually there's an employer that has a vested interest in that individual. It's usually somebody that's got a bachelor's degree or master's degree. They want to invest the time and money. And for somebody here who's here illegally, either they're taking jobs that people aren't going to petition for them, and it just doesn't necessarily work out. And usually a lot of the people coming here illegally aren't necessarily eligible for the lottery. They can, but there's not that many people that actually win the lottery. I've been doing this since '96, and I've only probably met 3 people that have won the immigration lottery. Now, a lot of people, what they do is they call this system, the current immigration system, broken. And that definition, everyone may have their own definition. I'll kind of simplify it. On the one hand, you have people that say it's broken because it takes too long for people, it's too complex, you have people waiting a long time. Kind of to illustrate that, under family base, if a U.S. citizen wants to petition for their brother or sister and that person was born in the Philippines, they're processing applications for people that began the process in 1989. So that's about 23 years. And so if somebody in that situation wants to file now, it's not going to be 20 years, it's probably going to be 40 years, and very well that person may very well be dead by the time they're eligible to get a green card. Now that's an extreme example, but that's kind of what you're facing. And on the other side with employment, the majority of employment visas go to people coming from India. For what they call employment-based third preference, which are usually individuals who have a bachelor's degree in a position that has a bachelor's degree, they're processing people that started that process in 2002. And the way that process works is they have to be in that job until they're eligible to get the green card. So this is somebody that probably came in the late 90s, came on an H, their employer decided to petition for them, they petitioned, and they're waiting for a green card. Individuals in that position now, they're saying they're probably going to be 15 to 20 years before they were eligible for a green card. So this is somebody who, a lot of times in the high-tech industry where I'm originally from, a lot of engineers that are, working out into current technology that you're saying, well, you got to stay in that job and work for that employer for a number of years. On the other side of the broken immigration system argument are individuals that say it's not working. They're not enforcing the laws, they're not taking care of the people, they're allowing too many people in here that are breaking the immigration laws, and they need to do a better job of that. And Congress has tried, I think, to some degree. They tried comprehensive immigration reform about 6 years ago and it failed. Individuals have tried piecemeal immigration laws, but the trouble with that is that hits a stalemate. On the one side, some people say, I'm not voting for any sort of immigration law unless it includes comprehensive immigration reform, even though you try to convince them, but this is still a good law in and of itself. On the other side, when you kind of push comprehensive immigration reform, people say, if there's anything in there that implies amnesty for the undocumented, I'm not voting for it. And so Congress essentially has done nothing. So what has happened? The states come in. You see what happened in Arizona, you see what happened in Alabama, and not that I'm for what they did or against what they did, but a lot of the states are frustrated. It's not hard to understand that a state like Arizona takes the brunt of all of this, and they look at the federal government and say, you're not doing enough, so we're going to do it ourselves. And then you have the issue for today, in-state tuition. You have states, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, says that there's about 12 states right now that have said that in-state tuition, that the undocumented can pay the in-state tuition. One of them being Maryland, which we know the situation here. There are 4 that have said no. In fact, there are 2 states that say that if you're undocumented, you can't even go to the state schools. So just to kind of wrap this up and give you a few other issues or a few other ways where the undocumented may run into problems and why it isn't so simple is, there are other aspects where you violate the law, it becomes very, very hard for you to get a green card. One is that it says that if you've been here for a certain period of certain period of time, you're barred from the United States for 10 years. So if you're here out of status for a year, you're barred from the United States for 10 years. To illustrate it is that, let's say you have a young person meets the love of their life, is a U.S. citizen, because they checked to make sure they did have a U.S. passport before they dated them, because they wanted to immigrate to the United States. I'm sorry, that's a joke. But they petition for them, and then they go, great, they do the process. The person goes overseas to get the green card and says, you know what, you are eligible for the green card, but you were out of status. Come back 10 years from now. And so what happens is it becomes very difficult. So what do? They usually don't do anything. Or there is a waiver, but the waiver is hard to get. I see that I'm out of time, but hopefully I was able to, in that short amount of time, to give you some idea of what the immigration system is like in the United States.
Thank you. I gave you a tough job there. Tell us all of U.S. immigration policy in 8 minutes. And I next want to introduce you to Pastor Paul Johnson. Pastor Johnson's the co-chair of a group called Action in Montgomery. He also does an amazing thing, which is serve as the pastor of 2 different churches at the same time. He's the pastor of Grace United Methodist Church in Tacoma Park and of Agar Road United Methodist Church in Hyattsville. Pastor Johnson will speak to us about why we should vote for the Maryland Dream referendum. Pastor Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. As you mentioned, I do pastor Grace, which is in Tacoma Park in Montgomery County, and Agar Road is in Hyattsville, which is in Prince George's County. A very diverse area. Both of my congregations are multicultural and multi-ethnic. I'm also a part of the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is commonly referred to as the IAF. The IAF is the oldest and largest nonpartisan people's power organization in the United States. In Maryland, there are 3 IAF affiliates, AIM, which is Action in Montgomery, BILL, which is Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, and PATH, which is People Acting Together in Howard. As Marlene mentioned, I am the clergy chair for AIM. Maryland IAF believes all students who graduate from Maryland high schools should pay the same in-state tuition rate at Maryland state colleges and universities. We believe that it is morally wrong to require our youth to pay double, or in some cases even triple, the amount of their peers in order to go to college. Now, I realize some people who oppose the Maryland Dream Act have raised concerns that this will cost taxpayers too much in times of economic distress, but how much is hope worth? I refuse to believe that we are a state that wants to punish innocent, hardworking youth for decisions their parents made while they were children. Dream is an investment in our children's future. The truth is, we really can't know for sure in advance what the impact of Dream will be on the Maryland state budget. And some of the people who oppose the enactment of the Maryland Dream Act have exaggerated, claiming Dream would cost taxpayers over $160 million. This simply is not true. The nonpartisan State Department of Legislative Services calculated the annual cost would be about $3 million, which is very small when taken in context of our overall state budget, which typically exceeds $30 billion every year. Also, we must remember that the long-term increase in the tax base as a result of a more educated workforce would more than offset the cost of funding Dream. We all know that education is an investment in our state's future. I also realize some people who oppose the Maryland Dream Act have raised concerns that this bill will result in the displacement of U.S. citizens at competitive institutions of higher learning. And most often, they cite a concern for talented African American students from urban areas being displaced. As an African American, I find the displacement argument not only invalid, but also racially offensive. Do we really want to send a message to African American students that they are not bright enough or talented enough to compete against their peers who happen to be immigrants? As Marylanders, we value equality, and we also value the opportunity for all people. We want our children, regardless of their color or their culture or even their country that they were born in, we want them to be able to obtain a higher education and pursue a brighter future. The ability and the hard work our young people have demonstrated in high school should open the doors to affordable, high-quality college education. And we must also remember that the DREAM Act will not displace any Maryland students. Lastly, let me point out that if we fail to give all students ardent hope that they can better themselves and have doors of opportunity open to them if they study hard and do their best in school, we may very well find those same students whose hope we have denigrated and decimated faced with despair and with no reason to stay in school and to excel. Do we want to discourage our students and leave them in a state of despair, or do we want to invest in our students and give them hope? Now is the time to uphold the Maryland DREAM Act. So on November 6th, vote for question number 4. We cannot afford to defer the dreams of our youth any longer, or as Langston Hughes, the poet laureate of the Harlem Renaissance, so eloquently put it, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Don't let the dreams of our youth explode. Uphold the Maryland DREAM Act. So on November 6th, vote for number 4.
Thank you. Thanks, Pastor Johnson. And I now want you to hear the other side of the story. I want to introduce you to Mr. Jack Martin. Mr. Martin is Special Projects Director at FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and he's also a retired U.S. diplomat. Mr. Martin is going to speak on why you should vote against the Maryland Dream referendum. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. You know, I think that we all can appreciate immigrants, but I think that we have to also make a distinction between immigrants who come into the country legally and those who come into the country illegally or reside here illegally. And that basically is what we're talking about. We're talking about an issue of what policy should be taken with regard to people who are in the country residing here outside of our immigration law illegally. I think really in order to understand this Proposition 4, it's necessary to think about who gains and who loses. You know, obviously the people who would be able to take advantage of in-state tuition, the illegal immigrant youth, are going to gain by it. Here at this community college, the difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition for a full year with a load of 15 credits is about $5,000 a year. You know, that's a considerable sum of money, but that's not nearly as much as the difference, which would be over $20,000 a year if you're in a 4-year university school. And the question is, who's going to lose as a result of that? Well, it's whoever is paying for that subsidy for that student, and that's the Maryland taxpayer. I think that it's important to keep in mind. We are not saying that it's going to cost over $100 million a year, but we do have a study that's on our website at www.fairus.org, and that study documents an estimate of $28 million a year that would be applied to the Maryland taxpayer if this proposition is approved. The estimate that was given to the legislators when this was adopted, about $3 million, was one that only covered 2 years of education and covered community college costs. It didn't project it out as to what would happen when those community college students then went on to full 4-year college, which of course is a much higher price tag. Also, other winners are the parents of the illegal immigrants who came here illegally and brought the children illegally. They came looking for greater opportunity. They came looking for greater opportunity for their children. And if the children are able to take advantage of this in-state tuition, it clearly will be a benefit to those parents who came here illegally. But who else loses on this besides the taxpayer? Basically, the American people who expect that foreigners will respect our immigration law are losers every time that our immigration law is broken. And the reason that this is important is because every time that we accommodate people who have come into the country illegally, we are in effect encouraging others to come illegally. And it's the same with any other law. If the law is ignored, more people are going to break it. And that's one of the reasons that we have to have respect for our law. In addition, we're going to have some problem with the people who are illegally in the country also working, particularly if they are putting on pressure for the adoption of a full-scale amnesty so they can have legal status. If that happens, that means that they will be able to compete with our own American people for very scarce jobs. And I wouldn't make a distinction by race or ethnicity with regard to that. It simply is we have a lot of unemployed people in this country who are looking for jobs, and they should be our first priority. Now, that is already happening if you've been paying attention to the policy that had been adopted currently by the administration administered by the Department of Homeland Security. They are handing out work permits to people who are in the country illegally if they came in young and are living illegally here in the country. So right now we already have a beginning of this process of people who have come into the country illegally being given permits to look for jobs in competition with Americans who are also looking for those jobs. So basically what we have in this situation is we have the particular interests of the illegal immigrants and their parents on the one hand, and we have the interests of the society in general on the other. The society in general are the taxpayers, are the American people, are the unemployed people who are looking for work, and all of those interests lead to the conclusion that we should pay attention to the needs of the community in general rather than the particular interests of the people who are in the country illegally.
Thank you so much. And the last person to speak on our panel is someone who will speak from a much more personal experience point of view. Her name is Yaremi, and we're giving you only her first name. She's a student at Prince George's Community College. She attended high school in Laurel, at Laurel High School, and she's a sociology major here at the community college. Yaremi.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Yaremi, and like Dr. Collins said, I graduated from Maryland High School, Laurel High School, and I'm now a current student at Prince George's Community College. 12 years ago, my parents made a tough decision to leave the only place they knew, Mexico City. They decided to leave their families and life behind to offer a better future for my brother and me. Can you imagine leaving your home, your family, your belongings, everything you ever cared and worked for, and not know if you will ever come back to them? Many of you may not be able to relate to this, and you may ask, why would someone do that? The answer is simple. Most parents would do anything to see their children have a safe and better life. When my father had children of his own, he was determined to provide a better life, including a better education. Entering the United States was the way to achieve his goal. I was brought by my parents to the United States at the age of 10. I was placed in school where I couldn't speak or even understand the language. I felt segregated not by my nationality, but by a language and culture barrier. I was lost, afraid, and just felt different. As time passed, I started to learn. It was not easy. It took a lot of tears and hard work. Until finally, one day, I learned. I started to understand the language and even speaking it without noticing. Eventually, I started to forget what I used to call home. I began to build new memories, meet new people, and see new places. Maryland became my home. The United States became my country. Mexico City was now just the place I was born, and it started to become somewhat foreign to me. After so many years, things changed. People I know, along with loved ones, passed away. It hurts that I now have no ties to the country of my birth, but I am determined to succeed and make my parents and my new country proud of who I have become. I am a non-documented student at Prince George's Community College. My major is sociology. I would like to be a social worker so that I can help adults and children who are facing challenges in their own lives. I feel that guiding and teaching people in this way will encourage immigrants, along with others, to be productive members of society. I would like to continue my education in this regard. I am not asking for grants or any source of free money. Rather, all I am asking is to pay in-state tuition as offered to other in-state students. I truly appreciate my past teachers who have invested their time in me, helped me speak their language and fit in. I see continuing my education and my future degree as a way to give back to my community, society, and country. I've come so far. Please afford me this life-changing request to make a difference for myself and become a leader to others, so they might be inspired to be productive members of society. My parents gave up their homeland and risked their lives for me so that I could have a better life. My intention is not to be a burden to society, but rather a productive individual who is able to lead by example. Please allow us to work with you and vote yes for ballot number 4 on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear the point of views that were expressed here, and what we'd like to do now is allow each of the participants 3 minutes to respond or make any additional comments based on the issues that were raised so far. So I'm going to go back in the same order, starting with Mr. Conklin.
Usually when I think about this issue, to me I always think of it, we can always talk about cost. Everything costs money. If we value children, we do value children, we value education, so we pay for it. The issue is whether or not, even the undocumented bring value, and also how we approach them. My family and I have gotten a chance to build houses in Mexico for 3 years running, and one of the things that hit me the last time I was there is how different when you cross the line coming from Mexico into and I'm from California into California. Even, the immigration station there, how much nicer it was from, just a few feet away. And it occurs to me that as long as that disparity exists, people will always come. We can always talk about law and order. But the thing is, law and order doesn't happen in a vacuum. It can't always just be about the rule of law. And even in our own jurisprudence, we say that if somebody is so desperate, a situation of somebody stuck in the mountains in the snow, if they were to break into a cabin just to survive, they would not be prosecuted for that because their life is so desperate. And we would say that, well, them feeding themselves is most important. When I've spent time and seen people down in Mexico, I see very desperate lives. And a lot of people come thinking that they have no other option. And it is pretty callous for us to turn to them and say, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do anything for you. And I think that we need to always take that into account when we talk about why people come here. I often use the argument and it's really from Les Miserables. The whole story of that is, Jean Valjean steals a loaf of bread and gets 20 years. Are people coming to the United States to break into your house to steal your TV, or are they coming to your house because they need a loaf of bread to feed their family? Now, sure, there are some people that are coming just to steal a TV. There are bad actors everywhere in this world. But a lot of these people that I've seen, that I've dealt with, are people that are just desperate and have no other option, and we have to take that into account. There is rule of law. We can't just abandon that, but we also have to take it from the perspective of the individuals that are here.
Thank you. Pastor Johnson.
I have a 16-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. While I do allow input from my children, ultimately where we live is a decision that both my wife and myself make. I know of no law on the Maryland books that punishes children for the decision of their parents. Ultimately, the Maryland Dream Act is about educating children who, through no fault of their own, grew up in our Maryland school system. They develop friendships, they develop ties in Maryland. They love Maryland. They paid taxes, their parents paid taxes, it's fair that we give them in-state tuition at our Maryland state colleges and universities.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
You know, basically, the issue is messages. It's a question of what message it is that we send to the population that is living in the country illegally, depending upon how you vote on this proposition. It is partly a pocketbook issue, it is partly a rule of law issue, but it is also an issue of what message you are sending to the people who are residing illegally in this country in violation of our immigration law. And if that message is that we will continue to accommodate people who have come into the country illegally, then the message will go out into that community and beyond that community to their relatives and to their friends back in the country that they came from, that this community welcomes people who have come into the country illegally. And if that is the message, you can be sure that that will lead to an increase of people coming into the country illegally. That has been the experience in this country. It was documented most obviously in the 1986 amnesty that was adopted, when there were about 3 million illegal immigrants in the country. And now we're talking about a growth in that population after wiping the slate clean of growing of up to about 12 or 13 million people in the country illegally. These are people who are competing for jobs. They're coming here for jobs as well as for improved chances for their kids. It is also true that these are not people, for the most part, who are coming here because they are desperate, because they are starving, because they don't have jobs. This is documented in a survey that was done by the Pew Hispanic Center in Washington, D.C. They did surveys among Mexicans applying for the Mexican identity card, the Mexican matricula consular, and they found that the vast majority of those people who had come here illegally from Mexico had jobs in Mexico before they came to this country. They were coming here because of the fact that there was greater opportunity, and you can't fault people for that, but you can decide whether or not you want to adopt incentives that will encourage more people to come illegally, or you want to adopt disincentives that will send a message, do not come illegally. And that is basically what the vote on Proposition 4 is all about.
Thank you. And Yaremi.
Okay. I personally didn't break the law when I was brought to this country at the age of 10. My parents did that. I was pushed into this position. Ever since I'm now 22 years old, and ever since I was 18, I have not broken the law. I follow every rule I could. I've tried to have an education. So I want to continue my education. I don't want to be punished for something that I didn't make the decision on. Just like Pastor Paul said, my parents made that decision. So please, I want to remind you to exercise your vote on November 6th and vote for ballot number 4. Also, join Casa de Maryland and us to walk on October 6th from Casa de Maryland to the University of Maryland. Join us. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that this has been of educational experience for our listeners. This is an important issue, and it's a complicated issue. I encourage people to learn more about this and the other issues that are on the ballot. Of course, to register to vote in Maryland by October 16th, which you can do online, by the way, and be prepared and educated to vote in Maryland on November 6th. Thank you very much to all of our panelists, and thanks to our audience members for participating. Thank you.